What do you do when you're about to embark on a difficult task and you're not sure the extent to what you're about to get into? You're not sure how deep the water goes or how many difficulties are going to be there. If you're about to take on a monumental task with many foes and adversaries, I suggest you take Nehemiah's approach and find out the amount of the damage before you find out what you need to do to fix it. Welcome to Biblical Musings. Thank you for joining us. We're going to pick up in Nehemiah chapter 2 and look at Nehemiah as he gets to Jerusalem after partaking in a journey all the way from the Persian capital where he served his king as a cupbearer, got permission to leave and go rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. Now he has arrived, and I think it's very interesting the first thing Nehemiah does when he arrives. So let's read one with another. It says, "So I came to Jerusalem and was there 3 days. And I rose in the night, I and a few men with me, and I did not tell anyone what my God was putting into my mind to do for Jerusalem. And there was no animal with me except the animal on which I was riding. So I went out at night by the valley gate in the direction of the Dragon's Well, and on to the refuse gate, inspecting the walls of Jerusalem, which were broken down, and its gates, which were consumed by fire. Then I passed on to the fountain gate and the king's pool, but there was no place for my mount to pass. So I went up at night by the ravine and inspected the wall. Then I entered the valley gate again and returned. The officials did not know where I had gone or what I had done, nor had I as yet told the Jews, the priests, the nobles, the officials, or the rest who did the work." So Nehemiah is a man of some importance in the Persian capital, and he seems to be at least fairly well known to his people. A Jew so highly placed in the Persian Empire is probably known to a fair few Jews, whether he knows them or not. And he has come for the express purpose to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem, because Jerusalem is standing without any defense, with enemies on every side, and they are in danger every day, and they have no way to defend themselves in reality. They have no stable means of defense of any kind. That's the express purpose from which he comes. But when he arrives, he waits for 3 days. I find that so interesting. He waits for 3 days in Jerusalem. And he doesn't tell anyone he's arrived. And after 3 days, he goes out at night when no one can see him, with just a few friends with him, and looks at the damage. He inspects everything, every piece of the wall. He travels it all to see what he is up against. I don't know exactly what he was doing in those 3 days, because we're not told. My inclination is to say that when he arrived, he was in prayer, however. I can't prove that, but based on what Nehemiah has done at every turn so far in the book and what he will continue to do, he prays at every opportunity he has, and he prays before every difficult task begins. He just prays. He's a man of prayer. So that's what I think he was doing. But in either case, he waits. He shows patience. He shows strong-handedness to hold back and not jump in too fast, because he's about to undertake a large task. And then he goes out in secret and sees what he is up against. I would encourage you, if you're about to undertake something difficult, a life step of some kind, or you're going through something difficult, to slow down sometimes. Slow way down. Not just take a step back, but take a big step back. And just see what it is that you're up against. Don't worry about what you can do. Don't worry about who can help you. Don't put all that out of your mind. Just take a look at what is actually going on. What is it that I'm encountering? What is the bare facts of the case? What is it that's here? Whether it's good or bad or in between. And just see, with God on your side and in constant prayer, what it is that's going on. Then you'll much better be able. You'll be much stronger when you decide to approach the problem. When you attack, you'll have surveyed all the damage, as it were. You'll see where the problems lie, and you know where best to put your energies. if you take a good, long, prayerful look at what it is you're dealing with. Let's keep reading in Nehemiah. The officials didn't know I was here, and the rest who didn't work. He hasn't told not a soul. He says, Then I said to them, You see the bad situation we are in, that Jerusalem is desolate and its gates burned by fire. Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem, so that we will no longer be a reproach. I told them how the hand of my God had been favorable to me, and how also about the king's words which he had spoken to me. And then they said, Let us arise and build. So they put their hands to the good work. What is Nehemiah's reasoning for building the wall? The first reason he gives is, you know very well, you live here. The gates are down, burned with fire, and the wall's broken down, destroyed. We have no defense. Why should we rebuild the wall? So we can have defense, right? Obviously. No, that's not what he says. So we will no longer be a reproach. Because they're God's people. All right? They serve the Most High God, Jehovah himself. The only true God. The God. God's people have just come out of captivity in a foreign land, and they're living in a broken down, busted up city with enemies all around, people who hate them, and they have no means of defense. He says, let's rebuild this wall and remove the reproach on us. Because they bear the reproach of their fathers, they bear the reproach of the nations around them. They look bad. With good reason. They look bad. But they look bad, and it casts a bad light on God as well, because they're God's people. Now, God knows this. But Nehemiah's concerned not just with the defense of his people. He wants the nations around him to see God's people and give glory to the God above, because that's of primary concern, is God's glory, not even their defense. They look bad in the eyes of the world, and therefore God is looking bad in the eyes of the world because they're his people. He says, let's rebuild this wall. Let's rebuild this wall and remove some of that reproach. So God will be in a better light. And you'll see that. You'll see that as we move on, I believe. However, now we encounter the enemies again. Then they said, let us arise and build. So they put their hands to the good work. But when Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite official and Geshem the Arab heard it, they mocked us and despised us and said, what is this thing you are doing? Are you rebelling against the king? So I answered them and said to them, the God of heaven will give us success. Therefore we, his servants, will arise and build. But you have no portion, right, or memorial in Jerusalem. You have nothing to do with God. You have nothing to do with Jerusalem, his city, his footstool. We are going to arise and build. You see, they're calling into question. They're saying, if you're building this wall, then you must be planning to rebel against the king, our common master. Now, Nehemiah has come directly from the king of Persia with letters and everything else, having had a good conversation with him, with the queen being present. But these men are influential men. And remember, Nehemiah's not in the day of today. He can't just make a phone call and say, now, man, Persian king, you're going to be getting some phone calls and some letters and some emails, telling us we're rebelling against you. It's not true. We're just rebuilding the wall, just like we talked about. You can't do that. If these people choose to send a letter or an emissary or go visit the king, it's going to be weeks. And so the king's going to have weeks to hear only their view of what's going on, their biased propaganda, whatever you want to call it. And so even if Nehemiah hears that they've done this, it's going to be weeks and weeks before he can get in there and help give a counter response. This is going to be extremely dangerous. Extremely dangerous. But he is moving forward without a pause, because now he has surveyed the damage. He's seen the obstacles. He's rallied the people. He's rallied his support. And now he's moving on head on. Not just for his people. He's doing it for God's glory. And I think that's a wonderful, wonderful thing. If you're reading in Nehemiah and you're interested in keeping up, we're probably going to kind of take a survey of the book. We're probably not going to look at every single chapter or event that happens as we move forward. It's all good, and I encourage you to read it as we go along. But chapter 3 is mostly lists of names of people who are working on the wall, and it's valuable information, but it's probably not something I'll cover here in our time together. But I encourage you to look at Nehemiah with the mind of, how can I apply what Nehemiah does into my life? Because Nehemiah is going to come up with difficulty after difficulty, and he's going to encounter them in the most godly way possible, with patience, with wisdom, and with prayer always. So I encourage you to do the same. This has been Biblical Musings. Thank you for joining us, my friends.